Welcome back, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, now we will begin our Professor Session 3 proceedings. Professor Till, would you be so kind to please take over the proceeding and conduct the session?
Okay,
Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Divya, and welcome back, everyone. Our first speaker in this second part of the session is Richard Clark, who's going to engage in a particular challenge of connectivity by doing his talk distantly. And so I hope the technology is working. Welcome, Richard. We're over to you for 20 minutes on the Federated States of Micronesia and Chinese political warfare.
Thank you very much for your introduction and your introductory remarks. I believe you can all see the screen now. So yes, my name is Richard, and I will be discussing political warfare and gray zone activity in the Pacific with a focus on the Federated States of Micronesia. The Federated States of Micronesia, or FSM, is comprised of 607 islands separated into 4 politically distinct states. The nation became independent in 1986, departing its previous status as a unit of the UN Strategic Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands. Historical colonial administrations include the U.S. Navy, the Japanese Empire, the German Empire, and Spain. The westernmost state, Yap, is approximately between Palau and Guam and historically hosted the U.S. Navy in Leyte Atoll in its campaigns to liberate the Mariana Islands. Chuuk Lagoon, the largest lagoon on the planet, was the historical headquarters of the Japanese Imperial Navy. The FSM's neighbors of Palau and the Marshall Islands recognize Taiwan, and all 3 countries have a compact of free association with the United States. The compact with the U.S. guarantees that FSM citizens can live in the U.S. without formal immigration procedures, that the U.S. provides funding assistance in government programs like Pell Grants and the U.S. Post Office, and defers the FSM's defense and security to the U.S. My observation is that the Americans believe this treaty is a partnership, while Micronesians believe this treaty is a trade. The FSM is the only compact state with diplomatic relations with PRC, which began 3 months after Tiananmen Square incident in 1989, not a coincidence. Relations began because the PRC successfully marketed itself as being responsible for the FSM's independence. The story they tell is that the Soviet Union would not allow the FSM to divorce itself from the trust territory, but PRC intervention is what allowed this to happen. The FSM government has a positive history with PRC. They build infrastructure like secondary roads, buildings such as the Chuuk State Government Complex, add-ons such as the conference room at the FSM Department of Foreign Affairs, and donate dual-use cargo passenger vessels like the Havel Mahal II and the Y-12 aircraft passenger plane. PRC assistance, unlike assistance from the US, Japan, or Australia, lacks red tape and bureaucracy. While Americans require expense reports and Australians demand monitoring, reporting, and evaluation tools, the PRC only requires our request or our approval if the idea is their own, such as the PRC-built convention center immediately across from the office of the president. PRC-hosted events for dignitaries, the intelligentsia, and the economic elite include lavish displays of food and discreet handovers of cash, cell phones, and other gifts to people with power, such as political and traditional leaders. This past April 2023, I was in a cabinet meeting where it was formally reiterated by the Vice President, Secretary of Foreign Affairs, and other cabinet that our policy is to play the Americans and the Chinese against each other so as to maximize economic benefits and gains from each. This policy is not discussed with the United States, but some officials have told it to PRC. It's Micronesian culture to tell you what you want to hear and avoid the truth when the truth is impolite, and PRC knows this. The FSM will tell a donor partner that we're a poor country, even though we have $1.1 billion in the Compact Trust Fund, $500 million in a separate FSM trust fund, earn $70 million per year from fishing revenues while relying exclusively on the Compact funding to pay our entire education and health sectors. We also tell other countries that we're a democracy, though on July 4th we elected Yazdan Segra to represent Koshai State, but out of fear of her anti-corruption platform, she has not yet been seated as a senator. The U.S. Congress will vote soon to increase our compact assistance from about $90 million per year to $140 million per year. The effect is that the FSM tells every country and organization that they are our favorite one, and this can be and is used for personal benefit. The man with the glasses in this picture is the Pohnpei Director of Transportation Infrastructure, also the Iso Nankan, or traditional leader of Medellin. We told President Xi that he outranks the president, and that's why he received more than a dozen Huawei phones in Beijing when the president received only a few of them. Oftentimes, the FSM government's desire for projects and money leads to hollow results. The PRC know that the deepest natural harbor in Pohnpei is in Medellin, and they also believe Medellin is the most important place in the FSM. After all, its traditional leader outranks the president, right? They built several kilometers of roads that end at the harbor, and these roads were completed in September 2021. In the photo I have here from December 2022, you can see that the jungle has almost completely overtaken the road because the project doesn't benefit the people of the FSM, but it does keep local leaders popular and ensures again that the PRC have infrastructure that leads to assets they might want to use, which again in this case is Pohnpei's deepest natural harbor. Providing money, furniture, containers filled with plants, first-class travel to PRC, and visible public projects for politicians' benefit is observed to occur in part because the FSM government itself is pretty distant from its own citizens. Political leaders are often private sector leaders, and former President Christian, for example, runs his own hotels and construction companies, and so as a public servant, he both can and does appropriate public funds for projects that use his companies. The GDP per capita in the FSM is about $3,000, but the average senator is a millionaire. Only about 74% of our country can read in any language. Illiteracy, juxtaposed with purposeful opacity in governance, and our tendency to make journalists like Sherry O'Sullivan or Joyce McClure persona non grata, leads to citizens being aware of corruption as a concept, but unaware of specific incidents, such as a former president using public funds to send traditional leaders first class to Hawaii for a vacation, several senators using public and PRC funding for their election campaign, or several officials accepting PRC money to build their house, among so many others. For example, Senator Harper bought his house in Guam with cash. Ostensibly a collectivist society, FSM national identity is close to non-existent. You're more likely to identify as a Pohnpeian before you identify as a Micronesian, and you are more likely to identify with your family before you identify as a Pohnpeian. What benefits your family is more important than your community, but your community is also more important than your country. PRC knows this, and they use it. I'll give a few examples. FSM government agencies operate as fiefdoms. Our fisheries agency, which is in charge of regulating and such, all of our fisheries activities, the executive director has been found to be recruiting Micronesian citizens on behalf of PRC fishing companies and unilaterally accepting PRC research vessel applications in return for money and other forms of assistance. His wife works at the U.S. Embassy in a security position that oversees research vessels. These vessels have been seen to be tracking the FSM's fiber optic cables, tracking submarine travel paths out of Guam, placing buoys in the FSM's ocean territory. A flash drive that was sent to Palliker months after one of those vessels' journeys in the FSM included a number of Trojan viruses, which convinced former President Panuolo to create a bureau dedicated towards tackling cybersecurity issues. The current president, Wesley Semina, told Radio New Zealand a few days ago that he had no evidence of PRC interference in the FSM, but to repeat myself, we made a cybersecurity division in our Department of Justice because PRC sent us viruses. The former head of that division no longer works for the FSM government. President Panuolo removed several officials when he was still in power, including those at the Department of Foreign Affairs who were known to be assets of PRC. Those officials are back in their jobs before, like the current Deputy Secretary, Ricky Cantero. Some persons at the department have been observed to tell the PRC, "I'll help you if you help me," with regards to the FSM accepting various bilateral and multilateral agreements, including the Guangzhou Consensus of 2021 and the FSM joining the Global Development Initiative at the United Nations. In neither case did President Panuolo know or approve these decisions, and the Guangzhou Consensus, just for your reference, would seek to establish a PRC-led entity that competes with the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission. Leadership at the Department of Foreign Affairs, including contemporary leadership, is known to have received cash, furniture, and other benefits from PRC over the course of their careers. And diplomats in training who study in PRC are taught that the FSM's relationship with them is of equal strategic importance as it is with the US or other countries. So just to be very specific here, if you are the secretary, the deputy secretary, the assistant secretary, or deputy assistant secretary of the FSM Department of Foreign Affairs, every single one of you have been given a bribe in the form of a red envelope. For transparency purposes, so was I in December of 2019. But of those 4 positions today, it's those latter 3 that provide information to China on whatever the US, Australia, or Japan does. So one of the effects of these fiefdoms is that FSM government departments have a habit of simply not informing the office of the president of what they're doing on behalf of the country. When the Secretary of Foreign Affairs and the PRC ambassador of the FSM were asked why they didn't inform the president that they were going to be delivering a speech advocating for a free trade agreement with PRC when no such discussion took place within our government, the answer given was that the president didn't need to know. And the metadata for that particular speech was shown to have been written by a PRC official in Beijing, not an FSM official. And so the impact of the bulk of the FSM governments being beholden to PRC, whether it's through money, ideology, compromise, or ego, cannot be overstated. And that President Panuolo was wrong to reject the Common Development Vision, an agreement that would have otherwise destroyed the FSM's compact treaty with the United States. The senator also said the Americans were evil for flying airplanes over Yap State as part of Operation Guardian Shield, but the U.S. Embassy, in its wisdom, ignored our warnings and instead reported to Washington that the flyovers were very well received. And when PRC envoy Chen Bo visited the FSM this March, he described that common development vision was already agreed upon by consensus. Secretary Ollesar and Chief of Staff Jane Chigiel, who met with him, did not correct him that there wasn't such an agreement. And given President Semena's recent public assertions that the FSM will engage in economic diplomacy and seek to strengthen relations with China, it should be assumed that PRC will push this issue again at the third China PICS foreign ministers meeting. The point being then that just because the FSM accepts or rejects a particular agreement doesn't mean that the president signed off on it, that the people know about it, or that there was a process of review and approval. President Panuelo had to reject the Deepening the Blue Economy MOU in June of 2022, and again that December, finding out each time from his intelligence agency instead of from his cabinet. That agreement, which is here on the left, as you can see, will look at developing PRC ports, fiber optic cables, and possible exploration of oil, gas, and minerals in the FSM, among other areas of concern. The current President Semena, who has a financial relationship with PRC, has suggested that the FSM might sign this agreement or one like it in the future. Similarly, President Panuelo rejected Wu Wei as the incoming PRC ambassador because he was the Deputy Director General of the Department of External Security Affairs at their MFA, which has ties to PRC's MSS and NPS. Panuelo feared that Wu Wei would become ambassador under the new administration, and as of this June, he is. Of equal interest, the U.S. Defense Attaché Office has spent years discussing with the FSM regarding the development of an FSM National Security Council. Panuelo never received any briefings on these proposals, and several of the officials who were speaking to U.S. Armed Forces representatives were not authorized to do so. So to say it very clearly then, the United States Department of Defense and the Central Intelligence Agency were talking to FSM officials who misrepresented themselves and who they were working for. And the result of that is that Panuelo did not receive briefings on what a National Security Council could look like, but I've recently learned that PRC does have a copy of that. So I'm speaking a lot of words, and I understand that you want documentation. So in this email here, you can see from our Secretary of Foreign Affairs how, in his own words, our departments like Resource and Development failed to brief the president on information, and also how the PRC ambassador would still insist that we sign agreements anyway. If I had 5 hours, I would give you 5 hours of examples like this. So one of the first acts of the administration of President Semena was to destroy the FSM Information and Intelligence Service. That was the organization that I led. Semena tells public media that he has no evidence of PRC interference in the FSM's affairs, but he also accepted my resignation instead of his first security briefing. The effect is that there's no person or organization within the FSM anymore whose mission and mandate includes to protect the country from PRC political warfare. This was at PRC's recommendation vis-a-vis FSM officials who are known to receive financial support from them. It is public-facing information that the U.S. intends to place additional air assets in Yap State's main airport as part of its process of building and showing strength so as to deter PRC from further aggression. It should be known by people in this room that China Railway Construction Corporation will submit its bid to construct the Wolai Atoll runway this Friday. Wolai Atoll, if you remember that map I showed you, is about halfway between Yap proper and Chuk Lagoon. Several FSM officials who met with the Americans at the annual JCM defense meeting are known to my former organization to have historically provided PRC with notes, audio, and video recordings of meetings with U.S. and other officials. And so just to put it really bluntly, when the Americans told the FSM that they knew that the spy balloons over their country were PLA controlled and PLA operated, one of the very first things that our officials did was tell PRC everything that the Americans told us. So it should be presumed, for the safety and benefit of Micronesian lives, that the FSM government is presently an ally to the United States, Australia, and Japan only, that the FSM will provide PRC any information or insight it receives from its partners, that the FSM strategy is to play major powers against each other for personal benefit, ostensibly marketed as being for the community at large, and that by extension, if there is an invasion of Taiwan to occur on or before May of 2027, that the FSM, when forced to make a decision between its formal treaty allies and the PRC, will betray the compact of free association if it's seen as saving the lives or livelihoods of the FSM's leadership, with the lives and livelihoods of the citizenry not really being a consideration. So we've seen that the FSM's corrupt and the PRC feeds off this corruption, but just for your own edification, I'll give you some more visual examples. I ask, is China's 74th birthday an event that requires the FSM national government to recognize and celebrate? Being mindful that the current administration didn't do the same for the U.S. Independence Day, And also that President Simina was not in the FSM. He wasn't in his own country during FSM Independence Day. As mentioned, the PRC is building a convention center across from the office of the president. It has eyes on the president's conference room where he has all of his meetings and his office where he does everything else. When the FSM Attorney General, a former one, Joseph Gallon, tried to explore the venue, he was denied entry. When I tried to explore the venue, I was also denied entry and told to go away. The people that you see in this photo are the vice president and his wife. That's the vice speaker in yellow of Pohnpei Legislature and our ambassador to PRC, both of whom are, of course, members of the China-Micronesia Friendship Association, which we know works with the MSS. Here you see the PRC pilot farm in the FSM. It's been a pilot farm for about 20 to 25 years, something like that. It does not provide food for the Micronesian people, but it does provide food for the crews of PRC research vessels. As previously mentioned, the former Deputy Director General of the Department of External Security Affairs at PRC's MFA is now the Chinese ambassador to the FSM. But there's more to tell you here specifically. You see on the left that Wu Wei is meeting with the governor of Koshai. Wu Wei knew that the governor's staff, Nana William, was supposed to go to the U.S. For a training on disaster response. That training was partly funded by Taiwan. And so in this meeting, Wu Wei persuaded the governor that Nana William shouldn't go to that training. And that's not the first time this happens. There used to be a Foreign Service officer in Guam named Sylvia. I mean, she's still alive. She just doesn't work for our government anymore. But she was given the opportunity to go to the U.S. for a training, also funded by Taiwan, and was given the choice by Ricky Cantero to either keep her job or attend the training. That was at PRC's discretion or behest. Here, you may have seen Panuelo's March 2023 letter where he talked about PRC interference. In that letter, Panuelo mentioned that the PRC took one of our citizens to represent our country. And you can see that here. It's in the top right photo at 3 o'clock. That guy right there, that's Dulan Somway. He's a private FSM citizen. He's a gym teacher. But here he is representing the FSM in multilateral meetings. I mentioned before that the FSM's agency in charge of fisheries approves PRC research vessels that look at our fiber optic cables, that look for submarine travel paths that might be testing missiles. And I just want to make sure it's very clear that those are the same vessels that illegally transgress in Palau and Sri Lanka and other places. It is a cultural taboo in Chuk State, at least, in the Federated States of Micronesia, to treat somebody like a king. And yet you can see here that our current president is being treated like one. He receives financial and political support from PRC. He says that there's no evidence of PRC interference in our country. But if I can make this video work.
But you took a picture of my house. I say you took a picture of my house. You sure? But you took a picture of my house.
What you see there is a video from former President Panuelo. He recently had several PRC diplomats go to his house. They're photographing his wife, his children. So Panuelo himself has to accost them because the current government refuses to do so. So as corrupt and in bed with PRC as the FSM is, I just want to emphasize that our country still has legitimate development needs. Our children can't read. They die from constipation like a neighbor of mine a year ago. Our hyperbaric chamber at the hospital is filled with books because we don't know how to use it. When I used to be a school teacher, my children were trafficked. They went to PRC fishing vessels and were prostitutes. Power generation's inconsistent, even in the capital. The power goes off multiple times a week, often for hours at a time. Internet cables are scarce. They're very poorly maintained. Salt water inundates our taro patches. And wealth inequality is, according to some UN officials I spoke to last week, worse than what you might see in a place like South Africa or Brazil or Liberia or the US. So appreciating that I am nearly out of time, why should India care? After all, you give us money every year, and we never went to FIPIC. Of course, I should note that the reason we didn't go to FIPIC this year is because the same FSM diplomat who visited India last year, that's Kelvin Emmes, he and FSM Foreign Affairs were told by PRC that we shouldn't get tickets. And that's why we didn't get tickets, and that's why the FSM didn't go to FIPIC. That's also why your diplomat who's based in the Philippines had such trouble getting meetings with our government officials earlier this year. It's because PRC says that that shouldn't be happening. As for the money that we get from your country, we are supposed to be using it on solar panels, maybe for the president's residence, but that residence was built by PRC, and PRC doesn't want us to use your money for that. In other words, what you think might just be incompetence can sometimes also be malice. PRC doesn't want India in the FSM or in the Pacific. Yet, despite the PRC's efforts, India is actually very well liked in Micronesia. Micronesians know your country perhaps more than you know Micronesia. Our citizens are much more likely to watch Bollywood films than they are American movies. And so there's a cultural appreciation for India that resonates with our citizens, which leads to my, I promise, concluding slide. What can India do? And if we just look at the right side first, by my assessment, if India wants the Pacific to support PRC in a hot conflict, then you should do nothing at all. And you should listen to the Americans and everybody else who tell you that they got this. After all, what I'm saying is a little shocking and scary. You know, the U.S. has a compact with the FSM. So the idea that the FSM will betray them and lead to Americans and Micronesians dying through that betrayal would be shocking and revolting. These countries, they might be your friends. I really hope that they become very close allies of yours. But you should presume that they need your help as much as you need theirs. So by extension, then, if you want to maintain your maritime connectivity, but also if you don't want to see Micronesians die, which is really my purpose, then I am of the view that India should establish itself in the Pacific, really truly establish itself. Because the Pacific is ultimately about relationships. I'm my family before I'm Pohnpeian. I am a Pohnpeian before I'm Micronesian. You will never get the Pacific support unless you are on our islands. You have to be there for us to know who you are. Otherwise, we won't talk to you, we won't work with you, we won't listen to you. But if you have diplomatic presence in our countries, that's a real embassy with followed by programming that matters to individual villages, programming in food security, climate security, you will win the hearts of the people and be able to show Pacific governments that they don't have to choose between the West and PRC, that they could choose India.
Okay, thank you
Thank you.
very much indeed, Richard. Very good, thank you. If I may say so, a really depressing survey that I'm sure is bound to spark lots of questions in the Q&A session at the end of this section of the conference.